We are now recording, so I will use my recording voice. All right, Dave, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Oh, well, thanks. And thank you all for being here this evening. I just wanted to read a few poems from the new collection, The Understory. I've been having a lot of fun with the collection, sharing it with friends and talking about it in various ways. It's something published under the name and rubric of Every Other Thursday Press. And Every Other Thursday is the name, I may have said this before, who knows? That's the name of the poets group that I've been meeting with for more than 20 years. And we get together, of course, every other Thursday, and everybody is invited to bring a poem, and we share them and talk about them. And usually the person whose poem it is sits there quietly listening, and then we, have some wider conversation. But it's been a wonderful group. There's about 10 of us. And I just have really gotten to know these poets, most of whom are from the greater Boston area. One of them, named Sarah Bennett, is also a book designer, and she has designed the book, The Understory. And it's really something that I published. I paid for the publication, the printing, and all the rest of that, and paid Sarah to do the work on it. So it's not an independent press. And at first I was a little bit, daunted maybe at the thought of having this book out, not through a press, but through this group of poets, and it's really my own book. It turns out that it's just been wonderful because it's gotten me up off my butt and trying to let more people know about it. And I think that's really been good. It's fun to have a chance to share some of it with you. And I thought I'd just, I had picked out a few poems that I thought I might read and talk about. And I hope, there'll be a way for me to figure out the mechanics of having conversation at appropriate points as we go along. And one of the things that sort of as I was reading through the poems this time was realizing how deep my loyalty to other poets may turn out to be. Poets whose works I read, years ago, and they come back in various ways to help me make a poem come into being. And we'll see a couple of examples of that. One, that poem by Joyce Kilmer called Trees, and another poem, a sonnet by that guy named Wild Bill Shakespeare, sonnet number 73. Then also the whole process of translating and of getting to know and to really love Korean poetry and translate it, and then discover that it was showing me, particularly in the Shijo form, various ways to shape my own poetry as it began to come out on the page. And so I hope those themes might emerge as I share these poems with you and talk a bit about them. There was something I was also hoping to share, and it's from our revisit in Korea a couple of years ago, the Peace Corps Revisit program. And let me ask, have any of you seen the video of David McCann performing that Shijo with a fan in his hand?
You showed it to us.
No, but we're looking forward to it today.
Because what I thought I'd do is just get that out of the way if I can share that screen. But I realized, again, new things occur as you think about things another time. One of the things I realized looking at that video once again is I had not practiced performing the Shijo that way, but I had loved listening to, the various pop music performers from Korea, particularly Psy. I keep hoping he'll do a Shijo poem, as you know. But I realized that for me, that little performance of mine happened in Korea. And it happened there where we were staying. And it happened with some people I had been talking with in the Korean language. And I think all of those things are really an important kind of background part to that little Shijo performance. It's like sitting down at a table with a bunch of the teachers from Andong Agriculture and Forestry High School on an evening excursion into town when we'd be having things to eat and lots of makgeolli to drink. And then all of a sudden, one of the teachers would say, "노래합시다." And we'd start singing songs, going around the table, pounding the chopsticks and keeping up. And I remember the first couple of times that happened, I was panicked because, I'd never done anything like that in my life. And then all of a sudden you realize it isn't how you perform, it's just that you're part of this group, this gathering. And that to me is a really important part of the poetry. So let me play that, if I can, do the screen share, and then I'll get to the poems in this recent collection. But let's see what happens.
Maybe you have to do a live performance.
I'm not going to do that. I'm going to see if I can get this going though. Oh, maybe not. Oh.
Dave, if you could send me the clip, I might have it somewhere.
옛날 공주인데
Oh, here you go.
정사리 벽계수야 수위감을 자랑마라 그러나 이렇게 해야지요 뭐 청사리 벽계수야 수위감을 자랑마라 일도 장애하면 다시 오기 어려워라 뚱 명월이만 공산하니 수역한들 어떠라 명월이만 공산하니 수역한들 어떠라 수역한들 어떠라.
That is so a little crazy. But let me see. It was fun to do it. And that's that poem, Jade Green Stream, don't be so proud of your easy passing through these blue hills. Once you reach the wide sea, to come back again would be hard. While the bright moon fills these empty hills, why not pause and then go on, if you will? And I probably talked about that at some earlier point, but that's a poem by the Kiseng Hangjini. And you can read it, you can hear it as a landscape design poem, or you can hear it as a comment about human life. Let's not be rushing around so busy, because before you know it, it's all over. So stop and see what's around you and enjoy it. And then also there's something about Hong Jinhee and the guy who had said he was, she could never charm him. And he heard this poem and he fell off his pony in the middle of the stream, and that was it for him. But recently, in the last couple of days, as I was thinking about it again, in a way, it could be seen as something about life. It could be seen, though, as something about what a poem is. It's out there. And while it's there, stop and listen, pay attention, and then see where you are at the end. So let me, with that as a beginning, I hope it goes either up or down from there, look at a few of my poems from the book, The Understory. And I'll try to get them on the screen in a way that you can see as I read them. And then I'll have a few comments about them. And then I hope we'll have a chance to talk about them as we go along. But you can see it's every other Thursday press. 4
David,
p.m.
Dave,
Yeah,
sometimes if you stop share and then start again, selecting, the book of poems, it'll
Yeah.
show up better.
it'll go better. I'll try that, Frank. There's stop share and then share screen.
Yeah, click
And
on the book and then share screen.
okay.
Great.
I think that looks better. Thanks. Table of contents. And then I thought I'd read this first poem. It's called Preface. And I'll say a couple of things about it. It caught me by surprise in the shape and the length, because usually the poems that I write are shorter than that, and they don't all have capital letters at the start of the lines. But it's a poem about a stone that I found up at the beach in Maine, where we go every summer. And let me read it and then offer a couple of more observations. Preface. Dear poem stone, I write this letter knowing how crazy my query may seem to you, coming in out of the blue, but attached, please find your photo, my friend, from up at the beach. As you know, I take selects from what rocks below our family cliff each and every year to go up to the cottage, journey you traveled some time ago to the porch where you sat looking out over the waters of the Atlantic, bathing in the sun each day until 2, when the big globe crosses the roof line, leaving us all to sink into shade oceanside. This time, you managed, as we were packing up for a home, to sneak in beneath the driver's seat under my butt, whispering such quiet admonitions as look right, look left ahead, and to the left, truck in the lane where trucks are not to be. Look out, you patiently advised. Now again, beside our driveway, snuggled into the grasses and leaves left from last year's fall, just waiting for someone to come along and take a picture as I did. This one I thought I'd put on the cover, but over the days since then, now trending into weeks, I realize your rock face must stone face a poem too. Rough, but calm for now. Not about to say anything after all. What can a stone say? I write, dear stone, wondering if you still compose a poem which I might translate into this compilation I do draft hereby. The stone rests, quiet as a poem. It just, I remember what it was like being fascinated by this grumbly looking stone that we had found and brought up to the cottage and then back here. And so all of that poem unfolded as I was thinking about the poem, about the photograph that I took of it, of thinking about using that photo on the cover of the book and a bunch of other things. But it was a line that kept unfolding and unfolding in a good way that carried me along to those last 3 lines, which I think are the whole point of the poem. And to me, they seem like a shijo there at the end, or even more, maybe something like a haiku, much as I might hesitate to say so. The stone rests, quiet as a poem. And I have found that happening from time to time, that I'll write a long poem and that it'll come to haiku at the end or something of that sort. I did a poem, oh gosh, 20 years ago that went on and on and on about the grasses in the yard and all the rest of it. And there was a line in the middle of that poem, do you want me? She whispers and turns to leaves. And it was about a tree and its conversation with the wind. But I was reading that poem some years later and all of a sudden noticed those lines. Do you want me? She whispers and turns to leaves. And I pulled it out of the collection and sent it off to Acorn Haiku Journal. And they published it. And one of the things I love about that moment was the editor of the journal said she liked that poem, but would I consider taking the period off at the very end? Because I had, do you want me, she whispers, and turns to leaves, period. And the editor said, take that period out. And there you go. It was a haiku poem. Let me look at another poem in this gathering. It's called Landscape. And I was invited by the Shijo Poets Association of Korea to compose a Shijo poem for the Shijo Stones Park in Boryong. And they were going to put it on a stone there in the park. And so I wrote this poem, Landscape. And what I'll do is I'll read it in English, but then also let me read to you the Korean translation of it by the wonderful translator who does a lot of work working from Korean into English, named Woo Hyung-suk. Landscape, Shijo Stones Park dedication, Boryong, Korea, October 17, 2019. Geomantic force of this land, level fields, hills, ridges, leading mountains down to the sea, to these carved stones standing tall. Bow, circle, let the dance begin as these stones all rise up and sing. So you can see that's in the 3-line Shijo form. And as you know, with English language Shijo, we usually break each line in half and indent the second half, because otherwise you can see it would be a monster long line across the page. And I was thinking here of how this stone Shijo garden was toward the coast of Korea. And it was these quite tall stones with the Shijo poems carved on them. And there was something about that that for me connected with this whole idea of the geomantic force of the land and how it comes down out of the mountains and makes its way to the sea. And I really felt that when we were in Busan, and you get the sense of it from the mountains and the valleys, and that all of a sudden the ocean right there. And the translation of the poem, let me read it for you just so you can hear it in that other language. 멋진 풍경, 풍수지리 힘 갖춘 땅, 평야 언덕 능성 있어, 높은 산과 바다, 이어 시조비 우뚝 서니, 빙빙빙 춤을 추어라, 시가 살아 노래한다. And I just, it's for me just so wonderful to hear my poem in this transformed presentation in the Korean language. You know, all my life I've been having things go the other way. I try to bring a Korean poem into English, and here it goes the other way. And I've got somewhere, and if anybody wants to see it, I've got a photographic image of the person who carved the Shijo poem into the stone, standing there beside it. And it's a, you know, it's a big stone. And for me, it's just sort of amazing to see one of my poems there on a stone in this Shijo garden. Well, let me do another poem. This one is called One Shell of a Poem. And it's about and around Higgins Beach, where we go every summer. And the reason I wanted to read it was that it has sort of its own very strong, I felt, statement power. It told me what to write. And I find that happens when I'm writing a poem. There will be an image or a phrase or something that comes up that's really a surprise over and over and over from line to line to line. And that's one of the things I like about it, because there are a lot of poets who are very, I think, deliberate in what they are trying to put into a poem and get out there. And these are the real poets, I feel, the ones known in the country, Bob Hass, Robert, others. And my own sense of poetry and writing it is that I'm sort of expressing something in communication with the language and the landscape and perhaps memories, something of that sort. And it does remind me of the point of distinction made in the major preface to the Chinese Book of Odes between song and poetry. And it states that song is the expression of feeling, whereas poetry is the articulation of intent. And I feel like I'm on that one side, more towards song, and that there are a number of poets whose work I really admire, who are doing the other, who have an intent which they are able to put into words. But this one, One Shell of a Poem, is kind of another example for me of how a poem shapes itself, and I sit there kind of following it down the page. One shell of a poem. I will bring one with me or try, fly above the waves or scamper the way a piper will while gulls drift by and by. You and I, this afternoon in hazy light, down the beach to river end remembering, breakers back to beat heads against the line of rocks. They simply rise above when high. That's from a little walk down the beach that Ann and I made, and we were remembering as we went some of the folks we've known who have gone on. And then I wrote this poem, and one of the things I notice about it is the I echoes in try and by, you and I, hazy light. They simply rise above one high. There's kind of a sound structure to the poem that I kind of was carried along by. It was like I was in this little boat and there were these waves of sound picking me up. Well, this next one I wanted to read is called Once in a Pickle. And it's a very different kind. It's a memory of when I was young. This would have been about third or fourth grade. And my parents and my sister and I lived in Cambridge in Harvard graduate student housing. My dad was in graduate school at Harvard at the time. And down the lane over to Mount Auburn Street and then around the corner, there was this little shop, a variety store run by a lady named Mrs. Holmes. And I was remembering visiting there frequently, and this poem came to me. And a couple of things that I'll mention is, one, the poem is in the form of renga, the Japanese linked verse with the 5-7-5-7-7 syllable count pattern. And then also in the middle of the poem is an actual conversation, which I had no memory of as I started writing. And then all of a sudden, there was Mrs. Holmes speaking in the poem, which just to me was so amazing when it happened. So let me read this. Once in a pickle, Shaler Lane, Cambridge, 1953. Down the lane, around the corner, up a block, shop resting on its knees. Up 3 steps, open the door to dark space, shelves all around, filled with this and that, bags and packages, cans, tons of stuff I never looked at. 3rd grader, I thought barrel, center of the store. Mrs. Holmes would lift the cover off. Deep below, they lurked, green monsters. Nickel a pickle, you want? I want 100, but I only have a dime. Dime gets you 3. 1, 2, 3. She fished each one out, wax paper bag, handed it over. I dug out the dime. Here you are, Mrs. Holmes, thank you. You're welcome, she said, big Mrs. Holmes smile. And tell your mom, got cans, bags, all the specials still to go. I went, made my way out the door, jumped down the stairs, pulled out a pickle and started my munch, big green pickle all the way back home. It's fun to be back there again. But just nickel a pickle, you want? I mean, she was, I think, from Germany. And her English was a little bit unusual. And so, you know, and said, how many do you want? She said, nickel a pickle, you want? And that came back as this poem was unfolding itself. And it's so much fun to read again. Dime gets you 3. 1, 2, 3. Oh boy, that was a good day. Let me read Recess. I think of it as a couple of haiku poems. Again, it's about Higgins Beach. And this one was just accepted for publication by Earth's Daughters, a journal out in Buffalo, New York. And what's kind of fun about the surrounding life of this poem is that they wrote to me, well, a few weeks ago to let me know that they had accepted this poem for publication, and they wanted to make sure that it was still clear to be published, which would mean it had not been published. And I had sent it off months ago and had heard nothing from them, and so just put it without any other attribution into this collection, which got published. And then I thought, oh no, you know, I'm in big trouble now. But I wrote to them and explained the situation and expressed my sorrow that I hadn't gotten in touch. And they said, no, don't worry. You've got a nice book, and it's good to have this poem there too. And then the other part of it that was fun is that Earth's Daughters is located in Buffalo, New York, which is where my mother was born and grew up. And Anne and I visited there a number of years ago and went into the school where she had been a student in high school. So the place has a special resonance. But it's about Higgins Beach again. And once again, it was Anne and me walking down the beach and saw a bunch of hermit crabs in the sand in a kind of small sand trench. And so Recess is the result. Hermit crabs, school in the shallow sand trench, class out now where the sea waits. All right, let me try another couple of poems, if that's okay.
Great.
Yes,
So far,
please.
so good. And Frank, I'm so glad you got me with this screen share. That's good. Thank you. Well, all right, this Fool's March is a poem that I wrote, and I think it was prompted by something maybe it was in the Boston Globe or some other publication, perhaps online, asking poets and others to send stuff about March and about all the crazy stuff that happens in March. And I, brooded for a while and thought, I don't write poems about, March. And then all of a sudden, this poem started to unfold. And what was fun about it was the first couple of lines you'll probably recognize. And if not, I've got this buddy of mine, Billy Shakespeare. This is his sonnet 73, which starts, "That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bear ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang." And on from there, a beautiful Shakespearean sonnet.
Yeah.
And I came up with this horrible takeoff. Fool's March. That time of year thou mayst in us behold, when we have all put imaging and calls, texting, selfies, and emoji pasting on hold to pay our due respect to those bouncing balls, those sudden swishes through the air as leaps bring all of us living room fans roaring up from the couch, popcorn spilling on the rug in buttered heaps, cheers, tears, loud groans from all but the grouch who mumbles about March madness, and why should he throw his life away, abandon trumpeting or other alternative causes. You won't see me give up for any of this, my harumphating, or so he claims as he rises up and ambles off to the fridge for another pile of shambles. And well, let me do Flower at the Museum, and then a couple more, and then we'll be there. Flower at the Museum. Let me see if I can do this one. This was the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum a few months ago when they were having their nasturtium show. And we were there with our daughter and granddaughter, Kate and Helen, Ann and I. And it was just beautiful. This inner courtyard was filled with these flowers tumbling down from the upper balconies and filling up from the ground below. And then there was this, oh goodness, who could that possibly be? The result was this poem I wrote. And this is the one that follows along from Joyce Kilmer's poem. You probably all know it. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree, right? Have you heard that? Yeah. Let me read The Flower at the Museum. I'm pretty sure I'll never see a poem lovely as your knee unless you spin around by half and show your brightly gleaming calf. But wait, I say, are those your new boots that reach so deep down, such roots as spring up into summer's air, rising to gold and silver hair? A gleaming barrette, the lovely curl, throw me into this blissful swirl as words pour forth upon the page. But is it a poem or just my age? Isabella Stewart might have built this museum, but only you, so carpe my diem. Just, I didn't know that that was coming, the carpe my diem, but there I was in that line. Isabella Stewart might have built this museum. What, how, where does it go from here? And all of a sudden, you carpe my diem. And, and she does. But that was kind of fun. One of the things also that it brings back to mind is thinking about Joyce Kilmer. As you probably know, there's this poem that he wrote that is widely anthologized, and a lot of people, particularly the ones who write poetry with intent or who analyze poetry with intent, the folks who are really into literary analysis, tend to dismiss Joyce Kilmer and his poem Trees as just too, lightweight and not worth thinking about and all the rest of that. I just, every time I think about Kilmer, for one thing, I think what he wrote was a perfect poem. And in a way, people say, oh, is it, about trees and poetry and so on. I think it's a poem about a poem, which I think a lot of poems are, the way they unfold. But Joyce Kilmer himself was incredible and, lived from 1886 to 1918 and died in World War I, killed by a sniper bullet. And, there's just something about his life and his death and this poem that resonate for me in ways that I haven't yet figured out, but that are really, really meaningful. And all of a sudden, thinking about our visit to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, there was his poem shaping mine. And in a way saying to me, don't be afraid, you can do this, write a poem about that. And I did. And thank you, Joyce Kilmer, for making that happen. Well, is there time for a couple more?
I think there is.
Okay. I won't do Night of Falling Stars because it's several pages. But it's fun. And if you get a chance to look at it in the PDF file, I hope you will. I published it a couple of years ago with the same book designer, Sarah Bennett. But in that iteration, it had drawings that I had done up at Higgins Beach, and also a drawing that our granddaughter Helen had done of the seal in the poem. And I sent this poem, the book, I sent it off to a friend and poet out in California, and another copy of it to a poet in Ithaca, Robert Morgan. And what was so interesting was Bob Morgan wrote back, and about this poem, he said, this would make a perfect children's book with illustrations. And he didn't know that that's what it had been, but there was something about it that was, resonating that way for him. So of course, I got out a copy of the book with the illustrations and sent it off to him. We'll see what he thinks. Let me look at Morning Light. It's from 1973-74, when Ann and I and our daughter Kate were in Seoul, and I was working on my dissertation research, and we were living in Fulbright House, and down and around the corner, there were some shops up an alleyway where I occasionally went to get some eggs or other things. And an earlier version of this poem was published in Poetry Journal back in 1978. And I changed it just slightly to put into this collection. But again, for me, I like the poem a great deal, but what is so striking about it is the kind of analysis of the formation of an egg, which I had never read about or thought about. until I made this poem happen, or it made me.
Dave,
Morning light. Yeah.
Dave, do you want to go back and share the book or stick with the photo?
Oh, sorry. I will stop the share and share the book.
Okay.
There we are, right? Have we got it now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. And we can go back to those other poems if you want. But anyway, Morning Light, Seoul, 1974. At the shop around the corner, piles of eggs, lucent, faintly pink in the morning light. Round, once perfectly round. They were lengthened in their passage to this hour. I carry home 10 laced end to end with straw. From the kitchen table, a blue porcelain bowl spills their luminous scent. And that just describes what happened. You know, there were the 10 eggs laced end to end in one of those straw weaves. And I brought them back home and put them in a bowl in the kitchen. And you could smell the eggs, you know, it was just incredible. But also, as I wrote the poem, this whole thing about round, they were lengthened in their passage to this hour. And that was something the poem told me. And I don't know, I haven't checked that yet with any anatomical discussion of chickens and their eggs. It makes sense, you know, it does make sense. But it's somehow for me just a wonderful image of how these poems pass along through the chicken and emerge as eggs. You know, they always catch me by surprise. They're fun. Well, let me see, two more if I could. This one from Gilmore Pond up in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, where some friends of ours have a second home right on the shore of the lake. And well, I'll let the poem be the poem. Loon's Way, Gilmore Pond, Jaffrey, New Hampshire, July 2019. Here they are, setting things aswirl their bird-like way. Their frog was at intervals through the night. Here we are this morning. The winds move by, the trees, branches, and leaves registering. The sun up out over the pond, a gentle chorus here in this open hall. Touch the cup, taste, hear the winds, the breezes, birds, and draw the air down. Breathe it in. Not a soul to be seen on the pond. Steady, unhurried from the birds, their maple vantage point commentary, language of the thrush, while out there on the water, silhouette, observant, making his way back, a pause, drift, turn, taking his time, head down into the water, then back up, the way of the loon. Need hardly say, for me, that pond and being there is kind of like being in a holy space. And, you know, you have all these sounds and images around, but once again, the poem seems for me to come down to those last three lines: head down into the water, then back up, the way of the loon. And then let me close with my very first poem. My sister Judy found a notebook that my mother had kept way long ago. And she gave it to me to read through. And I discovered a page with this entry from November 18th, 1949. And you can guess how old I was then. I think 5.5, roughly. And my mother wrote it as David's first poem, but I changed that slightly for the title. But let me read it. It's kind of fun. I turned on my light at night when it was dark. I had a dream about people flying a kite, but those people got in a fight. There. So I'll stop there, but thank you
That
all
been
for,
translated into Korean?
oh, well, maybe I could, yeah. It'd be fun to do that. Because it's, as I've looked at it in this last several months, it does have a little bit of a look of a shijo to me. You know, the 3 parts. I turned on my light at night when it was dark, could be that first line. And then I had a dream about people flying a kite, the second line. But those people, that's the twist, got in a fight. Who knows? But anyway, thank you very much. I will stop my screen share.
Wow, great, great, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow. So we have some questions for Dave or comments?
I got one question. Thanks, David. You make
Sure.
it look so easy. How much effort, writing a poem, does it just come to you instantaneously, or do you have to go back and rethink it and massage it, and there you are?
Good question. Some of them come very quickly and easily. Some of them take longer, and I have to, there's a bunch of them that I'm working on now, about 10 different new poems. And I keep going back to them and I read them and I think, oh, and I make a little change. But again, it's not that I have in mind, a plan for the poem that I have to figure out and impose on the poem. It's more, I'm trying to explore what the poem is trying to make itself out to be. And I'm trying to listen and see and make adjustments there. So it, for me, has never seemed like hard work. It's always seemed like, I'm tempted to say it's always seemed like surfing. You have to get out there in the water and time it right, but then whoosh, you come in and it carries you.
I have a question about the place and dates on some of the poems.
Yeah.
I had always assumed that it was the place and date that the poem was written. And often that would be correct for like the walk you and Anne had. The walk and the poem being written were close together in time. But then there was the Mrs. Holmes and the pickle, which clearly the acknowledgement at the top was long ago, a memory, compared to when the poem was written. Is there a protocol usually, or do you just set the scene?
Boy, there probably is a protocol of some sort. I mean, I find, that like that poem about Mrs. Holmes just started happening not that long ago. But as you know, it's something that took place a long while ago.
Right.
And I can, in some ways, try to identify when that was in the body of the poem, or at some point note, as I did with the poem in my mother's notebook, that this was a poem which was written quite a long time ago.
Right.
But that's a tricky question, because for me, I write a lot of poems when we're up at the beach in Maine or in other places that have that same kind of, like the pond up in New Hampshire, that have for me this kind of resonance, and I'm just writing and I don't feel that I'm, intentionally doing something of that sort. But then, it can come along quite unexpectedly at a much later time. And with recollections of things, that's a very similar process, although very different circumstances. And, these poems, with the exception of that one from my mother's notebook, and then the other poem from Poetry Journal some 30 years ago, but these were all written in the last year or so.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask one more question then? I know I've already
Yeah.
used up one.
Go for it.
Behind, there's an old saying, behind every great poet, there's a woman. So can you expand on that?
Yeah.
She's over there on the other side of the house. Hi, Bunch.
And the answer is obvious in the poems.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the dedication
we're-
of the book too.
We're usually there at the beach together, and we go for walks on the beach. We've gone for walks around, in the area in Watertown, up and down the Charles River. What was it, a year and a half ago, I think now? Ann and I were doing a Zoom haiku workshop with our granddaughters and our daughter. And, there are a lot of things of that sort that we've done together, but then every once in a while also, there's just a poem like the one at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which is, there she is, and it's fun.
Well, I loved your dedication to Anne. And I'm also wondering, did you find any other poems in your mom's notebook? And have you, I guess you've always been a poet. I loved that one. And it did remind me of Shijo.
Yeah, that's something like that. I've looked through the journal some, and I want to keep looking through it. There aren't other poems, but there are these moments that my mother writes about. Like, we spent a year up in Maine at my grandparents' house, my father's parents, in just outside of Portland. And I was in a preschool program up there. And my mother wrote down how at some point I had made the comment that my teacher had just the right name for a kindergarten teacher, because her name was Miss Chase. And my mother loved it when I said silly things like that. And a lot of those are in there. And I have seen them, and they don't, some of them bring back memories. I can remember being out on the playground at the school up there and running around and Miss Chase calling us all back and chasing us back into the school. There are a lot of others, though, that I just love to read and let them kind of take their own time coming to me in other forms.
Okay, great. Thanks again,
Yeah.
Dave.
I hope everybody will try writing some Shijo and send some my way if you do. I love to share that and love to try it sometime in the future. But thank you, Frank.
Thank you,
Diane,
Dave.
thank you, everybody.
Okay, I'm going to put us into some breakout rooms, and you can talk a bit about poetry or Dave's poems or anything you'd like to talk about. Okay, there we go.